Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the April 17th, 2018 work session for the Methacton School District Board of Directors. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
By way of announcements, the public is hereby advised of the audio and video recording of this meeting for the purposes of rebroadcasting. An executive session of the board was held in the Farina Administration Building on April 9th, 2018, prior to the Property Committee meeting for the purpose of discussing matters related to the appraisal of Audubon Elementary School property. By way of attendance, looks like we have all board members here this evening. Recognition of guests and scheduled speakers, Dr. Zerbe.
Thank you, Ms. President. This evening we have three presentations. We have bond refinancing recommendation and resolution from PFM. We have the substitute teacher recommendation from Dr. Sosnovic, and we have a budget update and direction from Mr. Brooker and myself. So this evening we ask PFM if they would come forward. I believe there's handouts at your seat. They will be talking about a recommendation to do bond refinancing and to recommend a resolution be passed by the board, a parameters resolution be passed by the board for us to take advantage of that once those parameters are reached. Glenn?
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to speak from this document, if you will. Maybe I'll just give you a quick overview first. So what we have for you is a resolution that you could approve next week if you choose, that would authorize the refinancing series of 2018. There would be two series of bonds, a series of 18 and a series A. One bond issue is going to refund your variable rate bonds, convert them into, or refund them into fixed rate bonds. And then there's a second series of bond that is also has unlimited tax pledge behind it. And that bond issue, we call it a high to low refunding. There are higher interest rates that are fixed, and we can refund them with lower interest rates and save money. And so that would be the second bond issue. On that first bond issue I described, it's also our understanding that you would like to contribute some cash to that. And so the presumption is there's $800,000 that you would contribute at closing to redeem bonds. So we would not refinance that $800,000 worth. They would be redeemed early by your own cash. So that's a high-level view of what's here. Okay. So if we'll just flip through the pages. Page 1 shows you that interest rates have risen recently, but by a long-term chart, which is on the top part of the page, they're still very attractive. They went up quickly in January and have sort of stabilized around those levels right now. Page number 2 is sort of what I just described in terms of the refinancing of these bonds. These would be non-bank qualified. It's more than $10 million, and they would both be sold on the same date. Okay. A portion of the notes are grandfathered under Act 1, and they also receive state reimbursement. In letter C, you're going to contribute your cash. In letter D, the total amount would be just a shade over $11.5 million. It's to be determined. We've had a bunch of discussions with the underwriter about being able to sell and market non-bank qualified bonds and put a short call on them. So we're going to try to get a 5-year call on these bonds. Normally you can only get that with bank qualified, but because it's $11 million and it's short, we think we can do that. In number 2, as we mentioned, both of these are variable rate. So I believe you have in your budget a slightly higher number to cushion, and we're going to come in and lock in a fixed rate at about the same level. In letter number 3, there's we'd like to have a minimum target of savings. So if something happens and the market goes against us, we know when to pull back and not issue that series of bonds. We're recommending a target of at least $90,000. I think the printouts we have in here later on are at 106. And I'd like to think we'll be able to do better than that, assuming the market holds at the current levels. And then in number 4, just so you know, you still would have the ability to issue $8.5 million of new money bonds if you choose to do so in this calendar year, and those would be bank qualified, the way we've structured all of this. So you don't have to, but the plan we had put in place last year was a series of $8.5 million transactions. If you do decide to issue those bonds, they would be bank qualified in calendar year 18. Okay, on page 3 is a little timeline, sort of in the middle there. On today, April 17th, we're here to, just for discussion purposes, your action item will be next Tuesday, the 24th. That would be the last action the board takes. If you decide to vote yes on this, it would be your last action. Things would be put in place. We'd file with the Department of Community and Economic Development at the state. Once we receive that approval, we would lock in the interest rates towards the end of May. Okay, so you would get the rates available in May, assuming everything meets the targets. On page number 5, in the red column, this is the refinancing of the 2 variable rate notes. In column 6, that is the estimated savings relative to what you have in your budget for the variable rate. Call it $70,000 to $80,000 a year, and the $800,000, the prepayment would come off the end. So that would be your savings spread out over time compared to what's in the budget. In the blue column, this is the bond issue with what I called the high to low savings. In column 7, there would be $56,000 of savings in the current, in the budget that you're working on. And then there'd be some savings spread out. We're going to do what we can to try to move those savings, those back years, move that up into the second year. We won't know that for sure until we have the final interest rates. And then 8 just adds the 2 columns together. So you can see there's a bunch of savings spread out over different points in time. Okay. The next couple pages are really the down into the weeds and sort of the nuts and bolts of these different bond issues. Page 6 is the first variable rate bond issue. You have 2 principal payments due in 23 and 24. Page 7 is the other variable rate bond issue, and again, it's showing that you're budgeting 4%. If you jump to page 9, this would be the new bond issue. So the new bond issue would have the payments shown in column number 9. It would end up with the interest rates shown in column number 4, and again, we think we can come in lower than that depending on where the market turns out to be a month from now, but if it was today, we could come in a little bit better than that. And then column 11 is those savings again. Okay. If you go to the next page, 10, this is the existing fixed rate bond issue from 2013. Column 3 are the old interest rates. They're fixed. If you jump the page to page 12, this would be the new bond issue. Column 4 would be the new interest rate, the new fixed interest rates. And again, the savings are shown in column number 11, and we're going to try to move more of those savings up into the first 2 years. 13 is the composition of issue. The premium discount, again, the presumption that you're going to contribute cash, $800,000 to the refinancing would be due at settlement. And then the sources and uses of funds, including the cost of issuance. And then on page 15, this is the parameters schedule that you're being asked to approve for, just to clarify, because we don't have the actual interest rates for you that evening, you're going to approve a not to exceed amount, both not to exceed the total principal and also not to exceed interest rates. And so then that gives us the flexibility to have different maturity amounts and different interest rates as long as we're less than what's described here on page 15. And as long as we meet these other targets, then we would be authorized to proceed and we don't need to come back to the board for further action. So once the final interest rates are determined, then the business office would be able to sign on the board's behalf. So that's a quick 5-minute summary. I'll be happy to answer any questions. John is here. His firm has prepared the resolution for you to consider next week, and he'd also be happy to answer any questions as well.
And the resolution is attached to the agenda under the finance area. Are there any questions from members of the board?
Just thank you for that. It was very, very well done there. A couple questions. If on the series of 2013 that net local effort savings does go below 90,000, does the refinance of the variable rate debt move forward?
We can talk about that. I think we would move forward, though, unless we get different instructions from you.
Okay, but that would be something is that set up in the parameters resolution for that to happen?
No, I think if that happened, we'd work through your business office before we went forward.
Okay. And then with respect to page 15, I understand that you're setting maximums here, but why are the principal is so much greater than the amount we're refinancing? Because if I go back to page 2, we're refinancing $11.5 million, but the resolution goes up to $14.8 million.
Yeah.
And then the interest rates seem like that 5.5 is about double what the expectation is.
That's a fair question. I mean, the reason is if the market is determined that we should have premium bonds, we have the ability to use them. If we have premium bonds, we'd need a lot less of principal. If we would have discount bonds, then we would need to issue more bonds. And so we don't know any of those. And the law requires that we don't exceed any interest rate or any maturity amount. And so this just gives us the flexibility to stay within that. And then what happens is, once we have the final maturity schedule put together, John and his firm will file a certificate of non-completion. Is that the right words? And so any bonds that are not used or not issued, they go away.
So it's just allowing maximum flexibility on your pricing side, whether it's your significant discounts. It's kind of worst case scenario,
yes,
what you would expect.
And the board has done this before.
Right, I do recall something like that. I just had to need a refresher on what that was, why that was that way. And I think that is it. Thank you.
Any other questions from this side? If not, how about over here? Yes.
Glenn, can you talk about the interest rate impacts of issuing bank qualified versus non-bank qualified loans, and why we think there might not be a big difference here?
Well, one of the things we've seen since the Tax Reform Act, November, December, if you draw a line at December 31st looking backwards, there was a significant difference between bank qualified and non-bank qualified because the banks wanted the tax-exempt interest income. Since January 1, the banks have been a little bit less concerned about that. And also, the biggest difference is on longer bonds, sort of the 20-year bonds, where here most of your bonds are shorter. So that's why we want to try to push that for a shorter call.
Other questions?
I didn't make the finance meeting, but can Brian or somebody, Tim, mention or explain the $800,000, where that came from, the forethought?
Tim.
So as part of the Finance Committee, there's the capital campaign account, which has roughly $800,000+ in it. The recommendation that was brought in the Finance Committee was to use $800,000 of this to pay down the debt to lower the interest and future debt payments that the school district will have to pay.
And again, that's on the variable rate bonds, which were originally, used to pay for the fields. So we're actually taking the money that's been donated, contributed to our field project, and using that to pay down the debt associated with the building of the field project. So we think it's a good recommendation and a good use of those dollars. Other questions? Anyone else? Yes? If there's no other questions, we will continue to keep this on the agenda for your consideration at the meeting next week.
So we'll be here.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and advertise the resolution for formal consideration.
Yep.
We'll send that out to the newspaper tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we have Dr. Sosnovic. He has a handout. He's going to review the substitute teacher recommendation. Please know that we went into significant detail on this recommendation at the Education Committee. And I think Dr. Sosnovic is going to share some of that feedback as well as any other feedback that we received since that last presentation. Dr. Sosnovic?
Thank you, Dr. Zerbe. So good evening. Before you is the presentation I made before the Education Committee regarding the challenges and data we are experiencing with our professional substitute teachers. In essence, the presentation included detailed statewide, county, and district level data that illustrated that shortages in professional substitutes were not just specific to Methacton, but rather an issue that all districts across the Commonwealth are facing. The primary driver of the shortage stems from a reduction of newly certified teachers coming out of colleges and universities. As the data illustrates, statewide there's been a reduction of 73% since 12-13 from an approximate 16,000 new teachers coming out of universities to 4,400 as of last year. With their Instructional 1 certification. Furthermore, Pennsylvania Department of Education has suggested this trend is likely to continue. After examination of Montgomery County data as provided by the Substitute Teacher Service, STS, who is our substitute provider, Methacton ranks fairer than most school districts in our ability to fill our per diem subs. However, there's still much room for improvement. Also described, we are competing for a limited amount of substitutes within our geographic area and against our local school districts. And upon review of the per diem rates countywide, Methacton ranks last amongst our peers and is substantially less than our immediate neighbors. In response, the administration has made 3 recommendations to address these challenges. 1, to increase the per diem and LTS rates and establish a tier model with a longevity incentive as described to increase attractiveness and retain substitutes. 2, to increase our daily substitutes from 4 to 7 to stem the day-to-day unfilled jobs. And finally, we recommended implementing a guest teacher program whereby individuals who have a 4-year degree that completed requirements set forth by PDE can substitute in our schools daily. Ultimately, we believe this aggressive response will help lessen the impact of this overall supply and demand issue we and all other school districts throughout the Commonwealth are facing, and ultimately help position us to better provide some much-needed relief to our classroom teachers. So with that, the presentation is before you, and I'll be glad to take any type of questions.
Can you talk about the recommendation and the costs associated with this recommendation? I think that was one of the questions at the Education Committee meeting. And then I think the other follow-up question was about the guest teacher program. I believe that there was debate about the rates for the guest teacher being the same as a rate for a certified teacher that would be through our regular substitute process. So if you could talk about both of those, that would be good.
Yeah, so the substitute rates as we're recommending going from a $95 per day rate for the first 1 to 25 days aggregate to a tiered rate. That tier rate would be as follows. Unfortunately, I'm so sorry, I just noticed that your pages are not numbered, so it's the one that says substitute rate or substitute adjustment recommendation. So the per diem rate recommendation is for the first 1 to 20 days, we're looking at $115 a day to start. As substitutes are retained and continue to come to us, we provide tiered incentives for them to come and subs with us more and more, throughout the school year. They finally reach a level at 50-plus days where the rate is $150 per day. And what we've done is provided a longevity incentive suggesting to substitute teachers, because if they're subbing for us at that level, we feel comfortable with them, being within our schools and providing that service, that if they have not landed a contract for the next year somewhere, we'll bring them back and have them also continue to sub with us at that highest tier. Additionally, it's important for us to recognize our retirees. Our retirees provided a level of added value that we recognize, and as well as our membership, teacher membership also recognizes. They know our facilities, they know our procedures, they know our kids, they know the programs being offered, and so we feel it's important to recognize that added value and start them at the highest rate. Respectively with the long-term substitute rate. As we looked at that, the last time the substitute rates were adjusted, I believe in 15-16, they were only adjusted for a per diem rate and raised it to 95, as I mentioned before, and plus 26 days at 105. The long-term substitute rate was based then on a $40,000 annual salary and has not been adjusted in some time. We feel it's important for us to bring our rate to a level that would make us competitive with our peers relative to the substitute rate, and also in line with our MEA salary matrix as presented in the 2017-18 recently ratified salary matrix. So we are suggesting that we match the bachelor's step 1 to which is a $47,000 approximate annual salary, and raise that per diem rate. Additionally, a question was asked specifically about the rates and the variance that which I had provided. I provided an approximate cost based on the three-year actual per diem average. I believe Mr. Navarrete surfaced a question suggesting that that rate was greater than what I had offered. I looked at Mr. Navarrete's assessment and understood what he did, whereby he was comparing actuals then to the differential of what we potentially would need at 100% at the new rate. Although I respect Mr. Navarrete's assessment, which he says will add, instead of my projected $294,000 increase, his suggested a $450,000 increase. However, I contend that if you're going to look at this, we should do it apples to apples. So I took Mr. Navarrete's advice, and I looked not just at the actuals, but said if we filled 100% subs across the board for 3 years, apply the old rate to that, or figure out the average, apply the old rate, and then I applied the new rate and got a differential. That way I was looking at our maximum exposure at any given year, and I came up with an approximate cost of $325,000. What's important to note is that these are numbers, and whether the range, let's say my low estimate of 294 all the way up to the high estimate, which Mr. Navarrete provided at 450, is there are approximate values. And what's difficult, as I mentioned at the Education Committee, is that they're variable, meaning year to year it's difficult to assess how many people are going to go out. And for example, how many long-term subs are we going to need due to medical reasons or other issues that might come about? What are our per diem substitutes day to day looking like? What are those levels? But as the presentation describes, we do have a minimum and maximum, or at least a minimum exposure due to the number of days, personal days that we offer our MEA members. Relative to the guest teacher rate, I did take the request from the committee, and I had greater conversation with our folks at STS, and again for members of the board who were not there, just so I can kind of frame STS for you. We've been using STS as our substitute vendor since 1994. And STS is the #1 professional substitute service in Pennsylvania. They provide substitute services for over 60 districts throughout the Commonwealth. And so they're a very good resource and have a great handle on the trends going on in PA, and not just specific to the southeast region which we live, but also, like I just mentioned, across the Commonwealth. And I was very impressed with myself that I remembered all those statistics from STS because I couldn't find the slide. So I'm just checking, and I did say all of it right. So they've been with us for since 1994, and they have had over 60 plus school districts. So with that said, I mentioned to them about the guest teacher rate. So the question was, do we feel it necessary to offer a commensurate rate for guest teachers as we do our certified substitutes? And philosophically, we all agreed that, it doesn't sit with us very well because a certified teacher, in our opinion, carries much more value to the role as somebody with just a general 4-year degree. And so that wasn't our philosophical difference. And while the gentleman at STS, Mr. Godwin, also agreed to, the challenge becomes all of the districts have aligned their guest teacher rate commensurate with their per diem rate for their subs. And if we are to attract guest teachers, if we would change that rate and make us less than what our neighboring districts already are who provide guest teachers, that again would possibly diminish the overall pool, where our goal here is to attract as many individuals as possible. So I think I addressed both of those questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the members of the board? Paul?
Yeah, the one other question, Troy, that I know that you said that may be something we could adjust down the road, but I still, the differentiation for the certifications that are in greatest need, in supply and demand.
Yep.
Did you get any feedback on that?
Yeah, I did. I asked that question specifically, and a public member also had brought that to my attention as well as a result of my presentation. So the advice that we're getting, from STS is that our rate that we are offering our long-term subs is a highly competitive rate. And so where there's occasions where there might be an instance where you might want to try to negotiate somebody that holds a more difficult certification to come and come to, let's say, Methacton over another district. He didn't believe it positioned the district well overall, in a sense that creating various tiers for these different certifications wouldn't provide that much greater added value, but rather the LTS rate that we're moving to is going to make us one of the most attractive in the county. So he recommended not to tier it at this time.
So in your experience in our fill rates, though, are we having a disproportionate fill rate on those more unique skill sets or not? Because I would advocate then LTS is saying to make it a generic rate, but if we're having trouble filling science and Spanish and language and more specialized certifications, then I would recommend these rates for those, and then maybe slightly lower for the rates that we're having a better fill rate on.
Yeah, so it depends on, again, the certification and the number of individuals out there at any given time. So in the past, we have not had some of the challenges that we are experiencing this year relative to a couple subject areas. So if you would ask me if it's a trend that I believe has persisted over a number of years, I'm going to say no. Have we had challenges this year specifically? I would say yes, but the other piece that they cautioned us on was the perception of devaluing or overvaluing one certification over another. So saying that, let's say one of the advanced sciences is much more important in terms of their worth than maybe another certification. And so I would for all of those various reasons, we suggested to the board to continue down the path with this same rate.
So if I could add to that, it's important to recognize that the same types of certifications that are challenging for Methacton to attract for long-term substitute openings are equally the same ones that are challenging for other districts. I think the differentiating factor, aside from the possible change in the rate, is really whether or not that long-term position might turn into a potential full-time position. There's no secret that we've had some furloughs and some other attrition in positions over the period of the last couple of years, so that makes us kind of less attractive to those certifications that are harder to come by. So what we found, and Dr. Sosnovic, you can correct me if I'm wrong, people maybe coming here, and once another opens for the same, say, chemistry cert for a long-term sub at another district that typically is hiring 10, 15, 20 teachers a year, they're jumping from us to them to get that opportunity, and that's part of our challenge.
One last question, Troy, then, on the guest teacher program, the slide that says guest teacher program.
Yes.
Can you explain to me the process around this? The last bullet, school entity must first look to someone who's properly certified, second to someone who's certified outside their certification, and third to guest teachers. How do we verify that we've gone through that process of trying to define certification?
So there's a process set up inherently by the ASOP system to manage this, from what I understand as well. So the first let's say a position or a need becomes available. That's available and posted for all certified teachers. Guest teachers don't even see them until a specified time. I forget what time it is, typically early morning, that they have access to. So once we've exhausted all ability to find those per diem subs, and that the system recognizes that there's nothing out there, we're able to then open up that posting for guest teachers to fill. So it's a partially automated process through controls established in our ASOP program, as well as our ability as a district to assign subs in the morning through the guest teacher process.
And I assume that repeats daily? Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Mike?
Paul touched on two of mine already, but I'm looking, since they're not numbered, it's a little bit hard to point you in the right direction here, but the slide that's called Montgomery County fill rate.
Yep.
Methacton is highlighted at 90% for the current year, which out of Montgomery County looks like we're the second highest, only behind Springford.
Yep.
And then if you flip to further on in the presentation, the per diem for Montgomery County, a Montgomery County comparison where it shows our pay in comparison to Montgomery County, it looks like we are the lowest.
That's correct.
So how do we know that it's necessarily the money that's going to drive these numbers?
So as you astutely pointed out, our fill rate, as I mentioned in my preamble, is fairly good compared to our Montgomery County peers, and also that we are dead last as it comes to the rates. There's many other things that make Methacton a very attractive place to work. The staff, the students, the geographic area, etc. So we are talking about trying to attract from our neighbors like Springford, North Penn, and others, that last 10% of individuals to come and fulfill these roles. And so like Dr. Zerbe had mentioned, a lot of times per diem subs, especially LTSs, want to sub at a district for the purposes of getting their foot in the door with the hopes that they get a long-term contract. That is not an option for us, and that's been something that's publicly stated. Unless, there's a retirement or something that we absolutely need to fill, we've had public conversations relative to furloughs and the like. So with that said, our only other true mechanism is to adjust our rate to make us comparable to our peer school districts, so that we hope that with the rate adjustment that makes us more attractive, along with the additional things that I just mentioned, our staff, students, facilities, and everything else, it's enough of an incentive for somebody to come and work for Methacton.
Yeah, I know that we didn't do the full presentation, but in the full presentation is actually a three-pronged approach, not only to increase the rates for per diem and for long-term subs, but also I believe it was, is it 7
district substitutes?
Yeah,
going
explain
4 to
that
7.
real quick. What
Yeah,
that
no
means?
problem. So what we have generally is, I think I quoted, we on average need about 22 substitutes a day here at Methacton. And some of those substitutes are what we define as district substitutes. So we work out an agreement with these individuals and say, listen, instead of you having to get up every night, search all the boards throughout the districts and select something, we'll provide you a level of consistency of being at Methacton so long as you allow us to assign you across the board K-12 to any unfilled met need in the morning. So as I explained to the Education Committee, there's often times we'll go to bed at night and we look pretty good for the next day, and then people wake up and people don't feel well, and next thing you know, we're in a bind because there's a lack of substitutes just in general. So we use these district level our district substitutes to stem that bleeding, so to speak. So our recommendation is to just work, assign 7 of them to daily jobs whenever necessary, to make them district subs. And this is not going to be an additional cost to the district. It's going to be just an adjustment in how we're going to basically secure 7 additional people in a manner in which provides us greater level of flexibility. But again, for the same reasons that I mentioned before, oftentimes people are reluctant to do a daily substitute for those specified reasons. So our goal is to try to achieve to a 7 individual rate for next year.
Yeah, just a couple follow-ups on that. So you mentioned going back to the rates, making us competitive. But if we in fact go with the rates that are being suggested, that we would actually be the highest paying across the board, correct? We're not shooting for average in the county, we're shooting to be top in the county? Would that be a correct statement? It looks like Springford right now would be the highest, and we would slightly go above them for the 1 to 20.
Yeah, at the 1 to 20, but at the max rate, no, we would be commensurate with them.
Right, but so they're the top now, so we'd be taking them over in 1 to 20 and then equal with them the rest of the way, right?
Yeah,
So,
comparatively speaking, yes.
and is this was there any, I don't know, kind of run through the numbers here of adjustments? Do we have to go as far as we're going from 95 and 105 to starting at 115 and ending at 150? Was there iterations run, likelihood of what that would do with the numbers?
Yeah, so how we derived at those numbers was working with, obviously, our substitute provider and examining the rates across the board. And again, what I mentioned, the challenges that we are facing of not being able to provide individuals long-term contracts and all the other pieces, we need to squeeze out that extra 10%, which we need, and when you mentioned we're at a higher rate, we need to be able to be attractive. And our closest neighbor, being one of them, Springford, to, attract, hopefully, individuals from that school district, we're going to have to be at a commensurate rate, with our peers. So that's how the rates were derived and presented to the Education Committee.
Yeah, I mean, your point's well taken. I think it was important that the committee, what we shared with the committee as well as we're sharing here tonight, this is pretty aggressive. But we've been hearing, and many of you have heard as you became new board members about the substitute challenges. And we think that while the rates are high, they're aggressive. We're trying a three-pronged approach, not only do the rates, create those full, those 7, we'll call them district subs, but the third part is seek the guest teacher process to try to balance the challenges. We don't have a whole lot of other tools, but those are the ones that seem to be most apparent. But it's open. That's why we're having a discussion here this evening. If there's other thoughts about how we might want to proceed, we're certainly open for suggestions. But we had thought almost a year or two ago that raising it by, I believe, $10 or $15 would make a difference, and I don't think we've seen much of a difference in that rate increase. And
Okay.
And just to be fair with everyone on the board, and we talked to the Education Committee about this as well, there's, none of these three approaches are a guarantee that we're going to close that gap from, being at 10% to 0%. So we're not making any unreasonable promises, but we think that this is an aggressive but an appropriate step forward to try to address the problem.
And just one last follow-up. So is this a all or nothing proposal? There's 3 prongs to this. We vote, is this a one voting item here, or can we support one of the 3 and be unsupportive of the other 2, or vice versa?
I think we can split it up however the board sees fit, and I'm fine with that.
If I could just say one thing, we did discuss it at the Education Committee and we discussed it at the Finance Committee as well. And the one thing that I did understand after talking in the Finance Committee is that there's a budget line item for substitutes, and it's not going to change or affect, correct me if I'm wrong, that budgeted component. So us moving numbers up and down, we're staying within the budget, if I'm correct, of that. Is that what you were explaining to me? And so I don't feel like we need to, let's be aggressive. That was the one thing that was complained about at every school, and 2 parents came to this board meeting about, but I do think it affects the budget item.
Yeah, just to concur with that, we did say at the Finance Committee meeting, while the amount of money that we need to use from year to year out of the, I believe, $1.5 million that's generally budgeted, we've used $500,000 less of that. We've used almost all of that in certain years. Our recommendation was that because of the variability and the fact that if we have a big run on substitute needs, we might be able to use offsets associated with staffing changes, and we also know that we have the budgetary reserve if we need to address that. But we did say in the budget meeting that we're not recommending an increase in the budget to address this particular. Now that doesn't say. That's for next year. That doesn't say that it wouldn't occur in the future. Okay?
We're just fighting.
Yeah. So, sorry, I said I was done there, but that just raises another question. But apples to apples, if we needed the same number this year versus the same number next year with an increased rate structure, it would cost us more. Correct? It just.
A couple things, and I'll come back to that. One, I want to say thank you to you and Dr. Zerbe and the Education Committee for bringing this up and addressing it, because it is, as Jen said, and you stated as well, when we went on our initial tour of all the buildings, excuse me, we asked the principals of each building what were their biggest issues and what could we do as a board to help you. And I would say out of the whole school, I think 3 or 4, maybe even 5 of them cited this as a big issue. All of them. I'm going to be corrected. All of them did. Okay. And I know it from personal experience. A couple comments then on first on the guest teachers. We talk about the possibility of paying more for certain certs outside of that program, and one of the things you stated was that we're concerned about differentiating or putting a different value on each of those certs. There's a disconnect there between that and then the fact that we're going to pay our guest teachers the same rate as our certified substitutes. They are not the same, and I don't think they should be paid the same. The certified rate is not available to guest teachers. The only rate that they have to compare to is the guest teacher rate in other districts. And if we're going to be aggressive with our rates, that's great, but we've got to compare the guest teacher rate to what's being paid at other school districts. So I would like to see the guest teacher rate brought down to be below the certified teacher rate, because I think when you talk about the message that we send to our teachers, I don't think it's a good one. On the financial side, I support Mike's point here that this is year over year at the same fill rate. We're talking about a $294,000 increase in expense. So regardless of what's in the budget, it's still an increased expense. So let's look at the actual dollars, not necessarily. We could budget $10 million for subs, but if we only use $1 million, it's like saying, who cares? Okay. Troy, the sheet that I sent you is, I want to make sure that when we're talking about the numbers, that we're talking about actual year-over-year outcomes, because the 294 assumes the same fill rate year over year. But our goal with this program is to fill the entire, is to have 100%. If we do that and we fill, the net impact year over year then is closer to, is 450. So I want to make sure that everybody's clear on that. The net impact isn't 300. The net impact, if we're successful, which we hope to be, is $450,000. So just to follow up on your comment about the rates, we talk about everything that's so great about Methacton, and that's why we're even able to hit, the rates, the fill rates that we do. Let's capitalize on that. We don't need to be top tier. We've proven we don't need to be top tier in pay to get great teachers. There's no reason we can't make a significant stepwise change and then come back next year and make another change, especially when we're looking to cut every dollar out of the budget as possible. Third question, or eighth question, whatever I'm on, the fill rates. I think we did ourselves a little bit of a disservice by comparing ourselves at 90%, because that includes the LTSs, which we filled at 100%. But the day-to-day disruption for our staff and for our students comes on the per diems. So here we're at 83.5, which is not great by any metric. Do we know how we compare with how that 83.5 compares with other districts?
Yeah, I've requested that information, but it's not something that's readily available to me. And I'll be honest, it's difficult for them to also gather. So the amount of legwork they've done to generate our various trends and all this data, I got to lean on them harder to see if they could provide me with the county-wide fill rates and broken down. And so even with that, they provided partials. But one thing to mention, just say that what the conversation that I had with them suggests that nobody's having an issue generally with LTSs. They're all at that high 90, 100% range. So to extrapolate from the previous chart that shows the fill rates across the district, you could probably get a general sense of, we'd still rank probably second, among our peers and stuff, because we'd all have a commensurate releveling due to, our fill rate of LTSs being, so high. So, I just put that out there. If it's really important to the board to find, I will do my absolute best to get that information, from STS. But I just wanted to provide that info as well.
Thanks. I don't think it's going to necessarily impact my vote. I just think it would be good data to have. So if it's not readily available, then I'm okay with that.
Any other questions? Okay.
So I'm going to go through this, I guess, for each of the three prongs. So the first step is trying to find that first page. to adjust the substitute rates. And so what I'm seeing is we have a 90% fill rate. And this is something that Mike said that triggered this for me, but we're pay-wise lowest in the county, or lowest, sorry, I'm having a really hard time navigating this. Is it the county? We're lowest in the county. Okay. So can we look at what is the demographic makeup of our substitutes? Because clearly, if we have a 90% fill rate, people aren't coming here for the money. So are we getting a lot of these new graduates who are looking to get their foot in the door with teaching? Or are we getting what I hear anecdotally, where it's parents of Methacton students who maybe have left teaching but still like to work from time to time and work in their children's schools? Is it people who live in the community who maybe, used to teach in another district and are retired? Or I'm wondering if we can get to the heart of why people are substitutes in Methacton, because clearly we're doing something right, and it doesn't just come down to money. So to that end, I think that going from the bottom of the county to the top of the county is not a necessary move. I think maybe a stepwise approach would be more appropriate there. And anything that we can do to gather that data as to who is substituting in our buildings, because if it's not people that are looking for money, what are they looking for? Because I think that would be a really valuable information for us to have as a district. Which I think also then addresses the need to increase the number of district substitutes. I like the idea of the district subs and having, I would even like if we had building subs, but a district sub is a step in the right direction so that we have at least somewhat of a guarantee of a certain percentage of positions being filled every day. My biggest concern, though, is this guest teacher program. I'm going to echo what Ralph has said, that I don't think that it is fair to offer a guest teacher the same rate of pay that a certified teacher has. My other concern is looking at where we are comparing ourselves in our fill rate. So when we look at our fill rate, we look at how we rank in the county. 90% we're second from the top. When we look at who we're comparing, when we look at this guest teacher impact chart, is this just the districts that are using the guest teacher program?
In our county, yes.
Okay, so when you look at what their fill rate is, their fill rates were nowhere near the 90% that we have. So to me, the districts that have taken this guest teacher option are the teachers that are struggling more than we are to fill these substitute positions. I would want to take more of a stepwise approach. Don't go to this third prong of the guest teacher program. I think I'm not seeing the need for that step. And to be honest, while I'm sure that there are some great individuals out there who would make excellent substitute teachers and don't have their certification, personally, I'd rather have a certified substitute in my child's classroom. So I think that looking at those first two steps, a stepwise increase in rates, which I think could then lead to them increasing the number of district subs. I think that both of those things, but the guest teacher program still gives me pause, and I think it's not a needed step for us at this point.
I'm just going to I didn't know this was going to be such a conversation, because we have a problem, they came up with a solution, I thought it was a good solution, but I needed to hear from finance, etc. I disagree. I was not an elementary education major. Some of my best colleagues, one's an accountant, one's a physicist. We've got parents out there, not just parents, community members who are aerospace engineers, and there's a lot of great people out there. I think it's personally worth a shot. We did discuss the whole money thing at the Education Committee, and I don't look at it as a disparaging to certified teachers, but other people do, so I respect that. I'm just finally going to speak up. I had no idea this was going to be such a topic of conversation. At least it's more important than rocks in the softball field.
Yeah, Kim, real quick on this, on the guest teacher, though, that I think the one key point of that is it is it's the last alternative in filling the position. So if you cannot find a certified substitute, that's where we had that last 10%. So that would be filling that last 10%. The questions that are being asked today, I'm wondering if his rate will ever get to that point. We won't have to use a lot of guest teachers if we move that 90 to 100% using certified. And to me, that I'd like to see a hybrid approach of this, and I would like to actually, I realize that's the law, but a preference to be able to use some really solid guest teachers that we discover to fill in, especially around those subjects that probably are harder to fill in. So I just wanted to make sure that, Kim, you know that this is not the first alternative through the process.
Yeah, I think it's also important that we recognize that, we're not talking about whether we want to have a certified or not certified teacher in front of students. This is really about having, once we've exhausted all opportunities to get certified individuals, is to have a competent individual who can be in front of students, because the challenge that occurs, and I'm certain many of you heard this, if not all of you, that at the elementary level, if we're not able to find a sub, we pull from within the buildings in terms of maybe a reading specialist or another teacher that is maybe in a specialist type of position that doesn't have a direct assignment for instructing students. But when that's exhausted, then we're at a position where we're actually taking classes and splitting them among our regular teachers. So now, when we have one need for a substitute, we've now impacted not only 25 students who don't have a teacher in front of them, that we probably instigated or interrupted 75 students as part of that whole process, because those 25 go into the rest of the team. I know it's hard to get your head around these particular recommendations, because financially and looking at the data, the comments you're making are reasonable. I'm telling you that we hear the anecdotal information, so part of this recommendation is part of what our teachers are telling us, and they're asking us to do something. So while we're okay with adjusting this or adjusting that, but I got to tell you, these are the tools that we have available to us. These are the things that we're recommending to go forward with and try to knock this challenge out. But if we want to make some adjustments, let's get to that point and get it done. So I know we have a couple other people to comment from. Yes.
So I thank you for these recommendations, and I agree with all the three prongs in principle. I will echo other thoughts that were said about how this might seem a little too aggressive with the rates for the per diem subs, because I think that if we look at our fill rate of 90%, which I know is not broken down into the per diem and the long term, but like 2 years ago, we did a little bit better than Springford. So I think that there is some sort of factor that has to not entirely do with money on this. So I would like to see those per diem rates revised for the sake of the budget. And I do agree with increasing the district substitute pool from 4 to 7, and I wonder if there would be any harm in even looking at that a little bit further. And I agree with the principle of the guest teacher program, but philosophically do not agree that they should be paid the same as certified teachers.
Any comments? Anyone else?
Just a couple clarifying questions. On the per diem recommended rates, 1 to 20, $115, 21 to 40, $125. So if a substitute is here for 40 days, are they getting $125 for all 40 days, or just for the 20 days from 21 to 40?
They would get it from the 21, it's a progressive step movement.
So it doesn't go back retroactive?
It's not retroactive.
Okay. All right. And the retiree rates, does that apply just to Methacton retirees or any teaching retiree?
Currently, just Methacton.
All right, any reason, might want to consider opening that up? Any retiree that might live near a school or something. And then these are the rates that the substitutes get. What's the STS fee on top of this?
So as I mentioned, the approximate cost for per diem is roughly about 32%, but that decreases as the rate goes up.
Okay.
And then it's 23% for LTS. And those rates are, contract negotiated rates in which if we do make these adjustments, I've already, told them to start, sharpening their pencils to see what they could do for us. However, as we mentioned in a board update, the rates, are adjusted appropriately because they have to incur greater costs due to state, local, federal taxes, unemployment, and the like, associated with paying these individuals. Their overall profit margin will remain approximately the same.
Okay. And then some of my other concerns have already been raised here. I won't repeat them, as far as like the fill rate, and the rates seem aggressive compared to other districts. I do have a concern about these dollars being covered in the budget. I'm not sure how that's supposedly at $300,000, so we can get into that in the next presentation. And I guess the other thing is, one thing I don't see in here is anything, I raised this at the Finance Committee meeting, is anything being done to control the demand or need for subs, whether that be placing controls around number of personal days in a building, or else you can't do anything with sick days, but things along those lines to maybe help manage the need for subs. Something I think should be looked at.
Yeah, specifically those type of items are items to be bargained in and discussed at a collective bargaining negotiations. Our members are afforded a certain number of personal days. There is language in the contract that prevents them from exhausting certain thresholds, per day for, personal and the like. However, if we were going to go down that route, as we start to explore that, the most appropriate time would, to introduce that type of controls would be within the next round of negotiations.
Any other questions?
Can I? One question, does the $294,000 estimate include the staffing cost, or is that just what you're including in the bill rate to the substitute?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by staffing cost?
Does the 294 include the invoice rate to STS?
Yes.
Okay. Also, is there any way we could get information on staffing by building? In my experience, I feel like I've seen we fill elementaries substitutes quickly. My challenges have been seen at the upper levels. That's just my experience. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
We could definitely get that information, but anecdotally, I'll just give you just an observation that I had recently at a diversity job fair that I went to last week. So I represented Methacton in the Montgomery County Diversity Job Fair. And if I had a son and or daughter that was looking to get into education, I would tell them not to be a K-6 certified sub with a special education cert, because 98 people of 100 came to us with that. So that kind of speaks to maybe a larger pool of individuals that have elementary level certifications out there, and a lack of secondary individuals looking for positions. 2 of approximately 100 people had secondary certs that were looking to be filled. So just an observation that's not grounded in any factual data, but definitely could get the staff fill rates by building and stuff like that.
And also, I understand the guest teacher, you said, is like a PDE kind of program. Is there, if we were to take this on, is there an assessment that we would do on the guest teachers?
Yeah, so let me just talk about that, if you don't mind, just for a second. So, as part of the PDE guidelines, like I mentioned before, you have to have, it's called a Type 6 permit through PDE that allows someone with a 4-year degree to do this. In order for someone to ultimately get that, they have to go through a qualifying program as approved by PDE. So STS, our vendor, partners with Lancaster, Lebanon, IU to take them through an 8-hour, basically course that provides them instruction on, basics of substitute teaching, professional ethics, collaboration, effective classroom behavior management, all those type of things. They also have to meet all of the various clearances as as any other individual. However, what we're recommending, and I'll throw out the term, Dr. Zerbe uses to methactinize these individuals. So take the minimum requirements set forth by PDE, and then also require people coming into our buildings to do an extra level of one, vetting, and also preparation before they get in front of students on their own. And so we'd look to do a half-day onboarding session with them in conjunction with the supervisor of continuous improvement professional development, Ms. Ricky, and we'll design something that will go over the basics of our district and discuss our expectations, policies, and procedures, and all that goes into maybe making them as prepared as possible. We'd also we recommended in the presentation that they do a 1-day teacher shadowing program too. So that'll give us another level of, is this somebody we want to make sure that we invite back and participate in this program. So we're putting different measures in place above and beyond a traditional guest teacher program, so we so we can ensure the right individuals are coming into our doors.
But I guess my concern is we have someone who has all these qualifications who I think I'm just aspiring to something more than a well-trained, warm body to watch the students. And would the principal then evaluate them after their performance is completed, or how do we, I think if we're rolling out the new program, how do we ensure that we're getting the right people into this program?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we always have flexibility of who we bring into our district. And so through the process of getting somebody ready for methactin to be a guest teacher, that'll give us exposure to that individual, get the principal's ability to provide input with that individual, and then ultimately allow us to make the decision or not to allow them ever into our schools. Yep.
All right, any other comments on that? So I think what I need is some direction, and I'm going to kind of split it up real quick and just kind of get a nod to get an idea. So on the first question is guest teacher program rate, okay? So if we were to have a guest teacher program, should the rate be lower than what we're recommending here? That's what I just want to kind of get an idea on. Okay. Does anyone have a recommended number, or would you like us to make that recommendation? So anyone have a recommended number? I'll look at that right now.
Well, I think that kind of goes with what are we recommending the per diem rates to become.
I understand. All right. Okay. All right. So the next question is the number of district substitutes. We have a recommendation of putting 7 into the district. Is there any, I didn't hear a whole lot on that, other than maybe even adding more. I think that's the one I heard. But is everybody okay with that, and looking at possibly adding more, see what that would do? Okay. And then the last one is the per diem, well, I'll talk long-term substitute rate. Is there an issue on the long-term substitute rate? Okay, okay. So now we're talking about the per diem rate. Is the tiering process appropriate? That's the one question I want to know. So tiering is appropriate. Is it the issue of the final rate, the highest rate? I think it's $150. Should we look at it at a different rate and then commensurate within the tier? Is that where Is that what I'm hearing?
Let me just say, I don't have any issue starting at 115. I don't know if we necessarily need 4 tiers compared to everybody else, but I would like to see that 150 come down. If you look at the max rates from everybody else, you've got 140, 130, excuse me, 140 in North Penn, 130 in Colonial, 150 in Springford, 125 in Norristown. Certainly, I think if we top out at that 130 rate, I think we're well within the ballpark of everybody else, 135. I'll just put it out there.
Before we make any decisions, Troy, before we put a final number for next month, I would imagine some other districts are changing their rate this spring for next year. I don't know if we can look into that, but I would imagine that we're not the only ones doing this. And I do understand people's concerns about that, but I would just really think about that. And I would, the Education Committee moved this forward as is. We're a board of 10, so I understand that, but the Education Committee moved this on as is. Again, like I said, it's a board of 10, so I respect that, but I would think really hard before we make a number today. Maybe that's something, I know we need to discuss it, but...
Are there any other comments on this particular matter? I got a pretty good sense of where we need to go.
Yeah, I think it's the one. I did raise my reluctance at the 150 at the Education Committee meeting as well, and that's where I am with that.
Just to kind of go along with what Ralph said, I think that maybe simplifying it, I think starting at 115 does make sense. Gets us to that higher rate to get people the foot in the door. But I'm also for simplifying it too. I would suggest maybe like a 115 from 1 to 25, and then plus 25 do 135. It puts us extremely competitive. It doesn't make us the top, and it's a simplified tier structure. I think it goes with the education's general goal of increasing rates without going too far. So I think that would be a decent compromise.
Anything else?
Sorry. Not to prolong this any further. Troy, how many per diems do we have right now that would be in the 50-plus category? I don't know, a ballpark?
Yeah, and honestly, I'd have to get that information late in a year like this. I'd probably suggest a fair amount, but I don't want to misspeak. If you don't mind, I'll get that for the weekly memo.
Yeah, that's fine. I appreciate that.
Any other comments? All right. Thank you very much for your input. We appreciate that. If I may ask, Ms. President, we do have some folks from Fidavia here. We don't have a presentation, scheduled, but I know that we have certainly an item that they can speak to that is for your information needs in terms of the under fiscal, in terms of the number 9I under master plan projects. Would it be okay if I brought them forward as guests here this evening, or shall we make them sit longer?
I don't know. I'm kind of tempted to make them sit, but no, that's okay. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. So on the agenda, members of the board, to be page 3 of 8, we have 4 master plan items when we have 2 attachments. The one master plan item is to approve the resolution for the repair at the high school roof as listed. And then there are 3 additional items asking for your permission to move forward with, we'll call them smaller projects, whereby we set limits not to exceed. And those smaller projects, that whole process, while it was talked about in property, it was finalized and uploaded to the agenda earlier this afternoon, so you may not have had an opportunity to look at that, but it certainly was a matter of discussion at property, and Mr. Sakala is here to present that information as well as answer any questions that you may have. Dan?
Hi, good evening. Good evening. I think it's all good news tonight. As a precursor, before Mr. Navarrette's property committee report, we had kickoff meetings yesterday on both the Arcola Auditorium project and the high school MEP project, and that went really well, so that's on its way. But specifically with regard to what Dr. Zerbe mentioned, I guess the three biggest projects we have for the first year capital work was Arcola and the MEP project, the third being the roofing project at the high school. We were carrying a value of, I think, 1.38 in the master plan budget for that, and that included soft costs. If you take out the soft costs, we were carrying 1.2 million. And the bids, we received bids for that, very competitive. 6 firms submitted responsible bids, and the lowest responsible bid was deemed to be from a firm, D.A. Nolt. Against the 1.2 million, we came in at 898,000. That was discussed in Property Committee. The contractor was vetted. You might recall that we have a roofing consultant that helped out in this regard with the high school roof, Sobek, and I personally don't have experience with Nolt. They're a fairly large firm. The roofing consultant has experience with them, and we've checked their credentials. Their bid is solid, and there's no reason not to accept it. It's a good number, so that's it. It's good news.
Questions for Mr. Sakala on the roofing bid and that resolution? And that was posted back on Friday. But then, if you would, maybe between you and Mark, go over the projects or the smaller projects.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight, wanted to talk about the small projects that were going to be requested to be voted on. The one group is general construction trades. It has a number of projects in it. Eagleville, there's some work there that we have talked about with regard to window replacements.
Can I catch up 1 second?
Yeah,
just
sure.
By way of reference, just because the Property Committee may have more familiarity with this, because they see this a lot. We took the master plan, which was all broken down by individual school, and we resorted the small items into scope of work, so that we could package them and bid them more effectively. So when Mark mentions general construction or HVAC, they're packaged items from the master plan that have been put together for efficiency. Sorry.
Oh, good. Thank you for your clarification. So as Dan spoke, they were broken out into these different trade groups. So we had a number of them for general construction. We had talked with regard to the window work at Eagleville. We want to really take care of the gasketing there and working through each one of these. We had some acoustical ceiling tile also at Eagleville that's on the list. There's some repairing of window frame at Woodland, and ethos repairs also at Woodland, and replace some damaged acoustical ceiling tile. It says ACT. That's at Worcester, and we have some trees that we have need to have removed around the back of the high school. So the total there comes down to around $75,600. I'm just doing this math as I'm looking here, but that's a not-to-exceed number that we'd be requesting to look for to proceed with that work. As we look at the HVAC contractor, we have a cooling tower repair work that we were looking at doing at the Arcola, and re-insulating some insulated ductwork, exterior insulated ductwork at Woodland. Those two projects will have a not-to-exceed number of $42,000. We have the plumbing work listed. It's listed as roof repairs, but we had talked about this before. This is some piping work associated with roof drains at Eagleville, and we have a number of $57,750. So that's also a not-to-exceed number. Those are the projects we were bringing to you tonight to look at voting for coming up at our next board meeting.
So are there any questions at this point in time for Mr. Fretz? I know this might be, so it's short notice. I don't expect that you've been trying to review all of this, but I know that we've had the discussions in the Property Committee meeting. But
yeah, just semantics, though. Why are we putting the soft costs on not the exceed part? And I mean, what we're going to get back is going to be the hard cost, right, on the quotes?
Right, we broke out the soft costs as we have with everything. We tried to put, some professional service dollars in there.
But do we see that? We don't really see that when we get the quotes back, coming back.
No, not necessarily. It depends how we take the work out. All these, we're trying to do the best we can do. Some of these jobs, as you see here, there's different values on every one of them. Some of them could end up being something that we could go out and be able to hire somebody without going out necessarily for, a prevailing wage type job. So by doing so, that helps us out and be able to handle it that way. So some of those might not have a soft cost. It might be, done in-house, some of that work, as far as doing those parts.
I just think that we should show the hard cost, because that's what we're expecting you to keep under. But this stuff.
I think I think what we tried to do is say these are the projected costs based on what we know, not only the hard cost but the soft cost. We're looking for authorization from the board to not to exceed a certain amount. We may have things that come in over what we projected at hard costs. We might have things that come under. I think all we're looking at is setting a parameter around, not to exceed for those projects that total dollar amount, and it's going to vary between the different projects. So if the board would rather use a different number, we can certainly adjust those, but that's what we have on the sheet. Any other questions? Mike?
Yeah, just a quick question on the one that's actually the one that's on hold for the roofing contractor for the roof repairs for Worcester. Could you just explain that one a little bit more?
I'm just looking, if you could, do you see the number associated with that?
It just says it's on hold. This is the...
on the top one where it's...
No, it's the very last
on the
one.
bottom, yeah, sure. Over at Worcester, we're still under warranty by Garland. So what we're looking at is when we have a rainstorm like we just had, if I see something, they're getting called to come out and take care of work. So they come out at no charge, and as long as it's warranty work, and would take care of that repair. So we're looking at pushing those dollars out into next year, or as far as being able to do a total roof replacement at that time, rather than putting $50,000 into the roof right now.
On the paper it lists full roof restoration is needed, but it's under warranty until the end of 2019. So would the expectation be that the entire roof does get replaced, but it's at no cost to us because it would still be under warranty?
No. Right now, I think that's probably, and I'm just talking here, it might be a 20-year warranty on the roof. So typically roofs are prorated for their life, and when you've exceeded your warranty, you don't get any work back from the contractor, so to say, to come back and work on the roof at that point. So in other words, right now, if I would call them in, they would come in to work on the roof there and make repairs to the roof as needed to the membrane of that roof because it has failed or is leaking under warranty. After that warranty runs up, say 2020, we call them up. That would be on us to take care of that repair. So next year we would look next year after the warranty's up to saying, okay, we're going to, put this on for replacement because the roof has been found in a condition that it needs to be replaced.
I think what I hear Mike saying, and I'm feeling the same kind of confusion, is it says after review with roof consultant, due to warranty expiration in 2019, full roof restoration is needed. So is full roof restoration needed?
Yes, right now the roofs, and I'm telling you that because I don't have the roof report right in front of me, but right now all our roofs are graded, and right now I believe that roof is slated to be replaced by the grading of the roof consultant.
So to help Mark out here, the warranty would be for the repairs that are being done, not the replacement of the roof.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to clear that up.
Right.
Mike, I'm just looking at the master plan number now. There is a line item here in 2025 to replace the roof for $1.3 million.
Other questions?
Just as a follow-up, that's why I kind of I go back to the codes in this original document here where it lists the roof repairs, FAS 3, master plan budget $47,250. this is really just part of. So I think that you listed a number that's 1.1 in the future of that would hit this number. So I just get, I go back to marking off and ticking off these things where we see bits and pieces at a time, and I think that this gets to my Dropbox comment that it would be really nice that if we, as a board, had it so we could pull up the property document, see what's actually scheduled, see what's been done, instead of just seeing little bits and pieces each time.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, there is an item on the list for this year for Worcester, and there's a separate item in the future for a full roof replacement.
If I may also comment, I don't think we've made any changes to the subsequent master plan years since you approved it. So everything should be consistent. Mm-hmm. The only thing we've been working on is year one. We're in the throes of the next couple months revisiting year two, and then you'll be seeing year two and any modifications that are, derived from the property committee on that. So everything should be consistent. That's always been the game plan from day one, was to develop a 10-year plan to serve as a baseline. We work on year one, and we track the costs, both hard and soft, from day one, so that we're always on the same page. We can always revert and track back to where we started.
Mike, I know what you're saying. I'll make sure it gets done.
Are there any other comments?
I'm sorry, Liz. Just one last comment about the ceiling tiles. I know yesterday was probably a pretty challenging day for our roofs. If we found anything new in any of these places that are supposed to get new ceiling tiles, let's make sure that we're solving the root problem before we replace any ceiling tiles.
Yes, we always try to go back out after, as you know, and go back after the roof leaks and then take care of the tiles also.
I'd also make a comment, I know it echoes kind of what I said in property and finance about paying for repairs with current day dollars instead of borrowing for them, but things like replacing ceiling tiles, to me that's one of those items that we should be paying out with current day cash, not with borrowed dollars.
Any other comments?
I just had a question about Woodland. I know some of the building is pretty new, and I just was wondering if you could tell me more about the window repairs there?
Yes, there's a section on the back of the building. There's I'm going to tell you it's near an entryway that I believe that it's a piece of extruded aluminum that's bent up into the window, so it actually has an arch in it, and that's what that is. So whether that extrusion, they call it storefront, whether that piece has to be taken out or the assembly has to be taken out, we're not sure yet.
Other questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for the bump.
Next on the agenda, we have a budget update and direction. Mr. Berger has prepared, I think, 3 handouts, which we'll post to the agenda following the meeting this evening. But you'll see that there's a budget timeline. There's a 5-year projection on April update. This is the same sheet that was shared at the, with one correction, shared at the Finance Committee meeting. And then we have what is what we'll call it as a scorecard. Basically, these are the outstanding decisions that we need to get to prior to providing the board with a recommended proposed final budget in May, as per the timeline. So, Mr. Berger, if you don't mind taking the board through the timeline, the budget, April update, and then the other decisions.
Sure. So the first one on the timeline to point out would be the May 16th date. When this was originally set up prior to the actual calendar being put in place, it was actually May 15th because of the primaries that was moved to May 16th. It was advertised correctly. However, the budget timeline never got updated to reflect that. And that's my area. Then moving into the 5-year projection. On the April update, what we did is we kept revenues based on the Act 1 and let the expenditures go to where the changes came in. That showed us a shortfall of $198,469. I did update the unassigned fund balance to be reflected as per request of Mr. Earnshaw. As it sees in 2020, the shortfall is 1.66, 2021, 2.49, 3.41 and 4.56 million as you get to 2023. Now on to the important slide. So, on the last one, there's some known changes that have come in since the presentation. A lot of it has even come in since then. And the update will be coming in after we get all the different directions from tonight. All these changes are in process and will be done. So the German teacher, including salary and benefits, is about $89,000. That was approved by the school board already.
It's on the agenda.
Oh, is it on this agenda?
Yeah, just to be clear.
It's ready to be approved by the school board. The early retirement incentive plan. So we originally had put in 6 MEA members. We are now actually at 12 retirees. We use those 12 retirees' actual numbers. That puts in the adjustment is a reduction in expenditures of $776,907.55. That includes salary and benefits. To offset that, the ones that we had to replace them would be an additional $552,025.80. That's the 6 additional replacement FTEs at step 3, bachelor's plus 15. We also then have to take out the HSA for the 6 individuals at $90,000, but we have to put back in the HSA for 12 FTE at $20,000 per, which is $240,000. The trash bids have come in. There's going to be an increase of almost $11,000. The fuel bids are coming in, and due to the increase in price, we had to adjust that number by $31,250. Insurance. The company that we currently have our insurance with has said that they would lock in our rates for the next 2 years if we sign with them. So right now the number in our budget is flat. There's going to be no change to that. There was an increase in special education funds from $100,000 to $150,000. Not really thrilled with that. So we are still shopping our insurance, workman's comp, building, everything. So we're out there actively trying to get that, but at least we know where we are currently, that we're no worse than we have in the budget right now. So there's not any change at this point. Obviously, we would look to do better than that at this point in time. The 4th healthcare look came in. The numbers went down from the 3rd, which will save us about $64,000. The coach and sponsor adjustment, which is per the contract with the salary adjustments for MEA, will increase about $9,000. Per Mr. Earnshaw's request, I did take a look at the interest income. I increased the interest income by $82,681.25. I know Mr. Earnshaw wants that to be higher. However, part of the interest income that he's looking at comes from the bond, which is about $8,000 a month. That is not in this fund. It's in a different fund. It can't be used as part of our general fund. So that number would get you to where you had. However, that has to get you down to the 82. I can share the calculations with you too if you'd like to see it. The audit RFP has come in, and we'll get to that recommendation further down on the agenda. But based on the potential recommendation, there'll be a reduction by $200,000. $2,000. The North Monco Technical Career Center budget changed. That went down by $27,000. And the copier leases also, further down on the agenda, will reduce by $14,433. So what does that all mean? All those things factor in, cuts our shortfall down from $198,500 down to about $74,000, and requires an Act 1 index of 2.501%. We also have pending decisions that have to come in.
Can I stop you there? Just one question to understand some of the biggest numbers here, the early retirement incentive. So the original expenditures of $109,798 had an assumption in there of, am I correct, that it had 6 retirees with 6 replacements? So your adjustments here are taking that up to 12 retirees and 12 replacements.
Correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
So at the 109,757, 12 retire, 12 are replaced.
Correct.
And you've accounted for the incremental, because you move up to the next tier on the incentive, and that's all in there as well.
And that's the $240,000 and the $90,000 that are below. The $90,000 comes out, that's the 6, and the $240,000 is
goes back in.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. Thank you. I just want to get to that before you make, because you got another adjustment coming here.
I'll get there.
All right.
It says 6 additional replacement FTE.
Because 6 are already included.
Okay,
So we're just adding the 6 additional to the
6
6 already
additional.
existing.
got
We
it.
wanted to make sure that we showed the math in and out as we go through the process.
That's why I want to make sure. I thought that was the case. I was to make sure everyone understood that that's what was happening here.
Yep. So then the pending decisions. So there's the potential of adding a requested special education teacher. That would cost about $69,500. 6 additional PCAs, about $168,000.
Just so everyone knows, both of these items, the 6 PCAs and a special ed teacher, were in the original proposed preliminary budget. But, in consultation with Director of Special Ed Pupil Services, we will not know to a degree whether we need both of those items or to the extent how many PCAs we need until sometime in May. So as we get closer to that date, we'll be making that recommendation to the board.
Okay, and as you saw in the impact of the refinancing for the 2013-2015 bonds, that will save the district next year $131,549 estimated. If we do not fill the MEA positions, and including salary and benefits, that'll save the district an additional $1.1 million. Now, that's asterisk to point out that I do not believe that that's the case, but I'm showing that that's the number that would be there. That's the 12 full individuals that would be coming out again.
So just to be clear, we have work to do, and we just got one today, did we not, Dr. Sosnovic?
That's correct.
Yeah. So we're at what? 12?
13.
13. I'm sorry. So we're evaluating every position. So we don't have this squared away, but I can reasonably tell you that there will be some we won't need to replace, and so we'll be coming back with you with a definitive number, and obviously we'll be coming back to you with a recommendation of which positions will be eliminated, but not people, of course.
Refresh my memory, when's the deadline?
April 27th, so they have until next Friday.
Tim, the 1.1 million, that's the value of these 12 replacements?
That's correct.
Okay.
Salary and benefits. The next item is the final assessment numbers. That's a 0. It's a placeholder for right now because we will not get that till after the end of this month. And then the last thing would be the 12 members HSA that we would pay. We would actually commit the funds this year, which would save the expense next year.
So one recommendation that the board might want to consider, because in the Finance Committee meeting, we gave we'll call it a draft of the year-end projection. And that draft year-end projection that Mr. Brooker had put together, he believes in the draft, we might be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1 million in surplus as a result of this year. But we still have some stuff to work out. Considering the fact that you will likely have some surplus, and that's what our belief is, the board has an option prior to the end of the calendar year to pass a resolution whereby either a certain percentage or a certain dollar amount they would like to commit as part of the fund balance in order to pay for the one-time expense associated with the early retirement incentive. So what does this mean? Well, it means that you would have budgeted dollars in this year that would result in a surplus, and those dollars would generally go into the general fund and go to your bottom line of the general fund. However, we would then need to budget for next year about the $240,000, or maybe more, depending on how many continue to apply. And that would be it would contribute to our expense, and it would put us in a different position in terms of total amount of taxes that we would need to raise. So that's one thing that the board could decide. They don't need to decide that today, but they'll likely want to decide that, and it might be a conversation to a greater degree with the Finance Committee as a recommendation to the full board prior to us passing the proposed final budget in May. So is everyone clear on what that could do? Because I think that actually provides us some reasonable relief for us to maybe address that, at least a $240,000 difference. Any questions on that so far?
If I could just ask a follow-up question along the lines of the forecast for the year, what's the driver of the surplus, or drivers?
The largest piece is the 3 strike days that went unpaid, and how that impacted the retro pay and the actual pay. So that amounts to roughly about $665,000.
And do we know the remainder? Is that a substantial item or two, or is that just a bunch of smaller items?
I haven't dug through it too much on that to figure out which one it is or where it comes into. It's just the first cut at it. I'd really like to see how April forecast actually goes into the projections, since it's the first year, and then go to it. But there are certain items that we're going to be looking at that did not have expenses in them that we know had expenses, so we're going to be looking to put those back in the right budget line items, such as the administrative projects did not get put into that budget line item, so we're going to move those things over into that so that it accounts for it correctly. The cleaning up will have to tighten up the model completely, and it's just an estimate at this point in time.
So, I'm sorry. So in summary, Mr. Bricker, I think we have what is kind of before us, where we might be somewhere in the neighborhood of closer to like a 1.66.
Well, so we ran the numbers because we were rushing to get this done after the meeting get here. So if we go by the $1.16 million savings, the Act 1 would be adjusted to 0.812. And I'll update this presentation to reflect that. And then if we pull out the removal of all the MEA, assuming that we did have to replace all the MEA, that would put us down to a $60,000 surplus, which to balance the budget would require an Act 1 of 2.318, which is below the 2.4 at this point in time.
Those two Act 1 index numbers are incorrect that are listed on the sheet. So
Yes.
it's 0.812?
Correct.
Then 2.318?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Comments, questions, and then obviously one item that's not on here because we haven't approved it yet would be the substitute teacher rate. I mean, we know that could theoretically be in either an ad or something to that effect. So that's the only other item that's not on here that we know of. Comments?
So as a comment, I appreciate the details here a little bit more and seeing clearly what's changing from budget to budget. However, what I don't see is again the one-year look here. I realize you provided us this, and you're changing, and I get that, I understand. But what is the guidance that's going to make that 1.659 if you decide, if there's a decision to go with a different than the Act 1 index? Or what is the path for filling in these gaps in the operating balance from years 2, 3, 4, 5? Brian?
Well, that's one of my questions that I had in going through this, is there's a lot of changes here, especially around the teachers that are retiring and ones that are going to be replaced. We need to see the impact of that going out into later years.
So the 12 teachers that I had originally known, I did not know about the 13th today, which is why this scorecard keeps changing so quickly. It's $1.7 million that will be removed from salary and benefits for 2000. That's the overall. So that will not carry through on the next year's budget, roughly. So I have to see where that all shakes out and how we come in. So the $776,000 will cut that 1.6 number to roughly about 800,000.
Wait, say that again. You said 1.7,
so
and we're...
the total coming out is $1.7 million. Okay, the number that we have in here, that the savings for the early retirement, is about $776,000. So my estimate right now, without having the model being updated and all the numbers, the salary, the fourth look, and how that will look into it, I'm thinking that should get the 2020 budget down to about $800,000 shortfall. It might be better than that, but until I actually pull the numbers over, I won't know for sure.
All right, I think it's one thing we should try to do. Agree, I know there's a lot of moving numbers here, but one thing we need to get to is exactly that, seeing how these adjustments flow through, through the 5-year projection schedule that you put together.
Yeah, once the early retirement incentive program ends, and we can move all that stuff out and put it in, then it'll all flow through and it'll all be done and that'll all be put into it. So by the May 9th one, everything will be incorporated into that.
Right. And then it becomes the question of what's the plan to close that $800,000 gap? And I think that goes towards the staffing discussion that kind of started at the end of the Finance Committee meeting last week or a week before. And how that 36 number plays in, and because you've already taken some positions out of this budget before the retirement incentive, and then how many more come out, and kind of what's the overall plan and timeline to kind of right-size the staffing across the district.
Yeah, so that's a good statement, and I think it's important for for the board and the public to understand where we are and certainly where we've been in terms of how to manage the projection going forward. So while Mr. Bricker is referring to the information that's associated with this budget for next year and how some of these changes listed on the scorecard might impact us going forward, I think it's probably even as important for the board to really understand where we've been with staffing, and I think where we need to go with staffing. So with that said, I just like to summarize and make a couple comments about all that, if I could. And while maybe some of the board members are familiar with this conversation because they were involved in contract negotiations, others certainly it might be a little bit more new information to them. But generally speaking, as part of the contract negotiation process back in probably the middle to end of July of 2017, both the administration and the /board and PSEA agreed that we would get together and exchange economic forecasts for the respective parts. And while the MEA brought in PSEA to represent them and share some information, I think the most important piece of information was shared by myself through our solicitor in the research that we did regarding staffing. So with that said, we created with the use of a tool it's called IDEX, and IDEX is we'll call it a data warehouse. It's a very well-known data warehouse that collects data associated with the PIMS process, Pennsylvania Information Management System. So PIMS is a reporting system that requires all Pennsylvania public schools to submit data on staffing, students. It's tons of pieces of data, and there's a lot of rules and checks associated with that data to ensure that districts are reporting that data in the same way. So, for example, the way we would report a classroom teacher in Methacton, Springfield would report a classroom teacher the same way. So when we do our counts, the counts are accurate. The descriptions and the types of positions are equal. So with that said, I leveraged the system to look at where we were in terms of our staffing compared to 3 groups. The first group being a group of Montgomery County schools, so it included all the schools. The second group was a group of North Monco Career Technical Center schools, so it includes the 5 schools that send students to North Monco. And the third group was based on our free reduced lunch count of similar economic schools in Pennsylvania. So not in the region, but in Pennsylvania. So with that information, we discovered that based on classroom teachers, not all teachers. So to give you an understanding of that, we might have say, for example, we have 400 members of MEA. They're not all considered classroom teachers. Maybe only 350 are classroom teachers, where they're not only assigned homerooms, but they also provide direct instruction. Someone that's not a classroom teacher might be a guidance counselor or a a reading specialist, someone like that. And I think it's important, and while this might take long, I think it's important for you to understand the basis of the information. So our goal really here was to do what's called, I'll consider it a math exercise, an exercise where we went in and we said, okay, let's pull this data in for us, for those three groups, and compare how Methacton does in our student-teacher ratio based on classroom teachers. And we did that, and we found that in each of the three groups, we were anywhere between 30 to, I believe it was potentially, I have the wrong number, but I'm going to say 40 to be safe, between the groups that we were consider overstaffed based on the math exercise that I did for that. And with that said, and knowing that there's a lot behind the staffing of a district. It's not just a matter of me sitting there, should we have the same number of staff that Perkiomen Valley does, or that some other neighboring district, or a district that we're trying to compare ourselves to. It's a math exercise for us to consider, should we be looking at certain things regarding our staffing. So a lot of things that play a part in how many staff we have is, number one, how we utilize our staff. So scheduling is a big contributing factor to how many staff we have. Our class size is also a contributing factor. Certainly if we have more students per class, we would require have less teachers. That's just a common thought. And there's a number of other attributes, specifically around the types of programs. Methacton has offered a substantial number of higher level programs. We have just about every AP offering that is available through AP. We have honors programs. We have other support programs that really are beneficial to our students and to our community, and quite frankly are reasons why parents decide to set up shop and call Methacton, Worcester, or Lower Providence their home. Because it's the programs, it's the services, it's all of that together. So while the math exercise did represent, a number that one could consider, challenging, but it does point us to the potential that while we may have been concerned about how to pay our teachers in a commensurate way with our neighbors, our challenge was, from a budgetary perspective, that we possibly couldn't get there because we were paying for too many teachers, or more teachers than we should. So with that said, that was a lot of the dilemma, and it's still the dilemma, and it's the type of work that I need to continue to investigate and work with my building principals, with my supervisors, with my directors, to make sure that we take this math exercise and we use it as a piece of information that allows us to check all the things that are important to Methacton and make sure that we're not overstaffed for any reason other than the fact that we are providing our product, our services in the way that we should be. So with that said, I think it's important that the board recognize that, as well as the public, that while we did that math exercise, we did suggest that even if we were half overstaffed, meaning that we had 18 more staff than the middle number was in those three groups, we certainly need to address that challenge. And so we talked about at the Finance Committee a lot of different numbers, and so we used the number 18, and 18 was really just not a number. It wasn't a target. It was just, if we had 36 too many teachers based on the mathematical exercise, half of that is 18. We said, you know what? Even if we definitely are overstaffed. So how do we deal with that? Well, we've been dealing with that. So while I don't have the numbers here for you this evening, certainly can tell you that for the last 4 years, we've been slowly but surely evaluating all of our staff, and we've been reducing professional staff, administrative staff, sports staff, staff in MESPA, to be commensurate with what I term as right sizing, which also is commensurate with making sure that we're meeting our programmatic obligations, at the same time being good fiscal stewards of the community. So we still have some work to do. We downsized at the high school quite some bit. We did a consolidation of schools where there were some positions that were eliminated. And I think that there should not be a surprise that these 12 or 13 retirements will be looked at very, very closely to make sure that we either do or do not need them for next year or into the future. And we've got to continue that work, because I can tell you that, it's not an exercise in trying to get to a target. It's an exercise in making sure that every time we're presented with a situation where we have someone that leaves, maybe goes to another position, retires, whatever it may be, that each of those positions is evaluated on a regular basis, and then the board, continues to get apprised of those and allows us to move forward at a pace that keeps our programs together. And provides, a reasonable fiscal method at doing so. And also keeps the humanistic perspective related to the staff that have been, committed to this district for a number of years. So I wanted to make sure, I just wanted to get out, and if there's questions, I'll take them, but I just wanted to get it out on the table that, yes, there was a report done, and I did the report, and we provided that report, and we also shared it with the association. So, I mean, this isn't not any secret, and, but I want to be clear that, while we're not targeting 18, we're not targeting 10, 12, there's no number to get to. It's really a matter of making sure that we address the positions as soon as we can, and with great detail. So with that, I'll answer any questions that the board might have relating to those comments.
Thank you, Dave, for that information. It was a long description, but I think it gets to a point that the board needs to see, and something that goes back to finance from January is we just had this budget presentation, and since January we've been asking for a staffing breakdown. Let's see how these numbers work out. Tonight was the first night, I think, that I found out that we have 358, I think the number was, classroom teachers. So that, like you said, there's other teachers who wouldn't be considered classroom teachers. They would be teachers on assignment or various degrees. I think it's important for the board to see the staffing in each school at each level with each program, so that when we hear that there is someone retiring, suppose all 12 are elementary, well, it's pretty obvious that you're going to have to replace a lot of them, because we're pretty lean on the elementary level. So we would know that out of the 12, we can't say we're not going to hire back 12. We probably actually, I bet Troy probably knows it off the top of his head now, how many guaranteed we'd have to replace. And I think that this gets back to the budget conversation, something that takes up 65 to 70% of our budget that we talk about on a high-level, hypothetical conversation level without actually seeing the concrete details. So again, I tasked Dr. Zerbe and Mr. Bricker, along with Troy, to come up with a good staffing model that can be presented to the board and to the public, so that when we talk about possibly reducing staff, we know where it might be, what we have, what we've had in the past. So just, it's the same request, just again.
Any other questions?
No, I guess on the staffing side, when do you think we'll know, or you'll have a good sense? I know the April 27th date is the final date, but when will this evaluation be completed? And like Mr. Ryan's saying that, here's what we need versus here's what we have. And then how do we close that gap? And how long will that take?
Yeah, I think it's we can give you a definitive answer once that window closes, and probably within, a few days thereafter.
Well, even beyond that, because that's going to give you one set of numbers.
Well, it's going to give us a set of numbers that will affect this year's budget.
Right, but
Yeah.
then I'm
sorry,
thinking...
next year's budget.
Right, but then you start looking at the forecast and how do you close those gaps? So it's not just a one-year window we're looking at. We need to look at all 4 years at least on this schedule to kind of see that and kind of know, because if you look at the ways to reduce staff, it's voluntary through attrition or you end up furloughing, and obviously attrition is easier without not having to replace. And if you know that, you know where you need to get to, then you can start making the decisions of how long you think it's going to take to get there. And that may impact the decisions of how you get there.
Yeah, I think we could certainly provide an estimate in terms of the number of staff that we need to address associated with each of the outgoing years. That's something we can definitely get to rather quickly. My challenge would be to tell you which those staff it'll be. So for example, because at some point, depending on how deep we want to go with the staffing, I would, or whatever the challenge is, we would, we're trying to do this in a way that preserves our programs, and I think that. Getting you the number and how many in each year is something we could probably share with you, shortly. I just don't know if we'd be able to say which the positions are, because every year, like this summer, it's possible that we lose a couple teachers as part of just natural attrition, finding jobs elsewhere, moves, things of that nature. Those positions also would be reviewed. Which would probably already have been in the budget, but we would certainly review them, determine whether or not they're best filled with a long-term sub for half a semester, so that we can get we can phase the class out or the section out in the second half of the year. I mean, those are the types of things that we are commonly faced with trying to make decisions on. So does the number and the sequence along the way, is that helpful for the board?
Well, I think it's not the number of staff you need to reduce to balance the budget. I think it's the number of staff that you could reduce while providing the same level of programs and services. And then once you get to that level, then, what's next? You got to figure that out. There's various ways you could look at programs. You could look at, I don't know, just when you get to that staffing level, you got to figure out how much is left. Because obviously when you get in these outer years, there's going to be some budgetary assumptions you make that become either reality or one way or the other, which could impact this bottom line. Because we've seen these projections where there's been big numbers bracketed, but when you go do the budget, it comes in. It comes in and it balances, and you really have not had to do too much. And that just goes to the accuracy of forecasting. That's something that we're doing current year projections. That's going to help. But to the extent we can tighten this up, that can impact the numbers as well. So I think if that first cut is getting to that, what are the needs for the programs we have? And what's that delta on staffing? I think that's step one. And if we can have that for May, at the Finance Committee meeting, I don't know if that's too short of a window. I looked at Tim and Troy, but I think that would be helpful. Because for this year, we're really running out of time. We're up against it here.
I think we can certainly have we'll have the positions, and we'll have the number of positions and the costs associated with that will be impactful for next year, and it's likely that we can take that information and carry that forward in the future year projections to show the outcome of say next year's or this year's decision or budgetary decisions, but getting to the deeper root of additional positions is certainly going to take some time if you want the specific positions. I think what's important is that when we start saying, well, we should have 2 more special ed teachers, or we should have an elementary teacher or a math teacher. I mean, it's those get to be very sensitive conversations associated with how we want to progress our programs going forward. So those are things that I'm going to need to spend a greater deal of time with my building principals to make sure that our review between Tim, Mary, Troy, that we're making sure that there aren't any other options other than the ones that are before us. So that will take some time, but we can.
And I don't think we need the specifics of it's a math teacher at Woodland or a math teacher in Arcola. I think we need to know that if you look at across the entire base, that it's 2. That we think, you don't have to get into specifics, but just know that there are maybe 2 extra teachers somewhere, and that equates to X dollars. And we think that could be resolved by, mid-2020, or just throwing out examples there.
Yeah, Brian, just to piggyback on what you're saying, I think, Dr. Zerbe, we do need this before we're voting on this on May 19th or whatever the date is. It's something we have asked for, and I don't think it's that difficult for what we're asking. You're making assumptions in the forecast around medical and so forth. You make assumptions on what you see going forward the next few years. We have basic information around our enrollment. So we have our enrollment. We know how our enrollment's going to supposedly change for the next four years, probably. That's what we're looking at. You make assumptions on what you're going to do in the high school around AP classes. Are we going to add more? Are we going to take some away? What are your assumptions? Are we going to adjust our concept, the team concept? The answer is no. And make sure the public understands that was part of the contract, that there was not a change in the team concept. It does not require, and I do respect that you're trying to care about the human element of saying, but like Brian says, it just says, as we go through, we see that in elementary schools, it doesn't have to require the specific school, but K through 5, in 2 years, we probably will need 3 less teachers because of the enrollment, or whatever it is. That's all we need. We need some type of forecasted human resource plan to make a decision on a budget that is not a one-year budget. A decision on what we're going to do for, the tax increase I don't know how to get there in these other areas, but if you show me a path, that makes me more comfortable with the lower tax rate. It's just, we need that input. It's like, it's a smaller thing, but I was hoping Dr. Spivak would be here. We talked about the club stuff coming in. We don't know if there's changes there. We don't want to have a big blow up like we did last May. But these are the things we asked for in front of making a decision on voting for the budget. And then we get to the last hour and we don't have those inputs. And it really makes it difficult to vote for a budget that's only on 1 year view. Thanks.
Any other comments?
I just have a question about the assumptions on the 5-year projection. The Act 1 is 2.4% in 2019 and is 2.7% further out. So is that known, or is that speculation?
They're forecasted numbers that we got from PD.
So it's a forecast, okay. And then are those numbers in these numbers, or no? Or are you making an assumption of a certain tax increase in these projections, or not at all?
Assuming we go up to the Act 1.
This is assuming the Act 1 of
Yep.
all those years. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
The only other question I had was, because we're talking about staff, is there a trending number every year that 2 tend to leave, 3 tend to leave, so like within a 5 to 10 year tracking, so that we're not talking about humans, but just a general trend that this many tend to leave every year, 2 or 3, through different, I don't know if there's a certain number every year.
I'm not aware of there's a trend. I mean, we can certainly look at how many ins and outs there were in every given year, and then come up with an average. But I don't know.
Just saying, let's say if there happen to be 2, 3, 4, 1, 3. When you say there's staffing reduction going on of 3 maybe it won't be so hard for us to swallow. I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say, but that we're not letting go of 3 humans working, but that's just the nature of what goes on in the industry. I don't, but.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I just had a couple other things for the scorecard here, if you want to add them to your list. One, and I think most of these we've talked about in the past. One is revenue from field signage. Something to consider. Talked about putting advertising at the high school, and hadn't heard any updates on that recently, but I guess something we should look at. Another one is we include growth in assessed value in outer years of the projection, but nothing in the current year budget. So I think it's maybe worth taking a look at how assessed values have grown during the course of a year and considering that number. I don't know how large or small that would be. I presume the $200,000 budgetary reserve is still in here, one of my favorite topics. I think that should go. I mean, we now have a fund balance of $7.3 million. That could cover any budgetary misses. I don't know that $200,000 gives you really that much on a $110 million budget. We also talked about looking at, I mean, it's a one-year impact, but looking at the amount and timing of the master plan borrowing, moving that from the fall to possibly the spring of the following calendar year. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that 2019 still includes 9.2% growth in transportation costs. Have you seen anything that could bring that down possibly? And some of the things that I know you're working on and so forth. I don't need an answer now, just something I think to take a look at. And then one other last thing, I mean, that I've seen in the past, and I don't know how big it would be impacted here in other budgets I've worked on, is the budgeting for staff vacancies. I don't know how much dollars that might be, if that's a big issue here, but that's a situation where an employee leaves, it's replaced by a long-term or a sub at a lower rate, and then hired a few months down the road, so you do get some salary savings. So that's something I've seen budgeted for in the past. I don't know if that's a big deal here or not. So, and I think that was it. Thanks.
I would just like to reiterate, having sat here for the last couple of years with Paul and Mike, I've heard their requests for better HR forecasting and modeling. I understand the need for sensitivity around the fact that we are talking about people, we're talking about lives, but at the same time, we do need to be able to get our heads wrapped around this, and I think given the changes in the landscape right now and recent legislation, I think that it's a different conversation than we would have had if we were having this discussion a year ago. So I think that I'd like to just, I guess, make a third to that comment that it's important data for us to have for this consideration.
So is it the, just by head nod, is the consensus of the board for us to bring forward a forecasting of the staffing? Is that what I want to make sure? Okay, good. All right. Any other questions on the budget presentation from Mr. Bricker?
Just one more request. Tim, can you, maybe for Finance in May, can you take us through how we actually budget for the substitutes? So we can actually capture these costs accurately. Thanks.
All right. Then on the 24th, we have some staff recognition and awards, and we have the annual strategic plan update. Okay. There will be some reports from each of the committees. There will be an opportunity for public comment on board action items. The minutes will be recommended for approval. And before we go on to the rest of the items, I think while there's not an item on here, we had a recent transportation issue this past weekend, and I just want to make sure that the board's apprised of that particular matter. Mr. Bricker, I know that you have some intimate knowledge in working with that. If you would just summarize it for the board. Essentially, we had a bus that didn't come and pick up students for the Arcola Jazz Festival. So, Mr. Bricker?
So there was a bus scheduled and confirmed by the Jazz Festival, for the Jazz Festival for Arcola. That was confirmed with dispatch, it was confirmed with the teacher, everything was set. However, along the way, there was a high school jazz band competition or festival that was scheduled for Saturday. A call was made to cancel all jazz band buses, that they were no longer needed. There was a miscommunication involved with the way that was handled, and confirmed that all jazz band buses should be canceled. The request was really for just the high school because that event was canceled. It was not for the Arcola also. However, because all jazz band buses were canceled, the Arcola band bus was canceled, which caused the students not to be able to make the Jazz Festival. In looking into it, one of the things that I've already put in place with regards to transportation is that, which would have probably avoided all this, is not only does the person requesting the cancellation need to have it confirmed, but the requester needs to have it confirmed also. Had that been done, obviously that would not have happened, and the bus would have gone on as planned. Additional steps we're looking at is an evening process to where we can contact for a student or have someone on call somehow that we can reach them in the event that this occurs, so that they can address it immediately versus wait to find out and then deal with it later.
Any questions from the board on that particular matter before we move on here?
Just wanted towards the end of what you said there. So there was no process in place ahead of now to have after-hour calls received by first student in terms with all the sports and music and everything that we have.
So it's a little different for the high school. That you have Dr. Spiewak, who has Amy's phone number to call her and reach out to her with stuff like that. In regards to the Arcola and elementary schools, the teacher should reach out to the principal, who then should be able to get in contact with Amy. The teacher, in this case, as far as I've been able to discover so far, called the transportation department and texted the principal, but didn't get a response, and therefore, by the time that everything got straightened out and figured out what was going on, it was too late to be able to get the buses there. But I have not figured out the second part of that breakdown.
Any other questions? If not, Mr. Bricker, we have fiscal items. If you want to go over those items, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. For tonight, you have the list of bills, the treasury report, budgetary transfer, North Monco Technical Career Center budget for 2018-2019, the district copier services, the approval of the RFP recommendation, the district auditor service, the approval of the RFP recommendation, general supplies bid awards, the bond resolution we've already went over, and the master plan projects also we all have already gone over.
Again, all these items were introduced and discussed to some length, except for the auditor services. You want to just go over that particular process, Mr. Bricker?
So with regards to the auditor services, Mr. Earnshaw, Mr. Ryan, and I met in my office to review the RFPs that were submitted to the school district. There were 5 RFPs submitted. The RFPs were submitted by Kimmel Lauren Associates, Gorman and Associates, Herbine and Company, Malley, and Zelenkowski. Upon rating the different RFPs based on cost, technical experience of the auditing firm, auditing experience within the Pennsylvania Public School District system, and experience and qualifications of the audit team, it was determined that Malley and Axelrod were the 2 that came in first and second. Mr. Ryan and Mr. Earnshaw, myself, and Dr. Zerby interviewed the team from Malley, And then subsequently, Mr. Earnshaw, Dr. Zerby, and myself interviewed the Zelton Coffee team. It's the recommendation being brought forth that we go with Malley based on the interview. They rated the highest, as well as the interviews proved that they seem to be in the best position to handle our needs.
So are there any other questions on any of the fiscal items before you that you'll be asked to vote on next week?
I don't need a lot of detail, but with the general supplies bid, does that cover pretty much almost everything? Not even a little bit? I was curious about that.
So it's about $209,000, and it does not cover everything. It covers the things that you can put out the bid, such as my favorite, the golf balls.
Well, I wrote that down. I wrote that down.
Yes, there's 216 golf balls. There's 216 golf balls. I will not be letting anyone use the credit card to go get golf balls. And different things that the IU puts out the bid, and that based on the volumes and requirements that we have, paper and different things like that, we order that.
And okay, and that makes sense. So then each building might have a little budget for things they weren't able to put out for bid, or...
There's the teacher supplies, there's the the stickers, good job stickers and stuff like that come through, different, there's the special education needs for autistic supporter, there's all kinds of little supply needs that go on throughout the year.
And the only one thing I noticed on there that I was curious about was through the IU laminating. I think I saw on there. It seems small, but it says MCIU batteries and lamination. Does that mean, I don't know.
I'd have to look into what the lamination
Okay, I just
covers.
wasn't sure.
I know we
that got
were getting
done.
batteries. The batteries I do know about. I don't know what whether the lamination's included at that or it's just batteries. I'll have to look at the actual
I was
bid
just
request.
curious about, it's not a huge number, but just see.
Okay. Any other questions on the fiscal items that are before you? If not, we'll move on. Next on the agenda are personnel items. Dr. Sosnovic.
Thank you, Dr. Zerby. For the board's consideration, next week we have 3 resignations classified, 1 employment professional for a German teacher, 1 uncompensated leave professional, 2 uncompensated leave classified. Just make note of the item underneath J, sabbatical leave. We're recommending the board to forego the sabbatical leave commitment of returning to active duty for Ms. Andruskavage due to medical reasons confirmed by her physician. We are asking you to approve the following supplemental contracts listed under item K. Also approve the items, the list of volunteers.
Any questions for Dr. Sosnovic on matters of personnel that are listed?
I know every situation is different, and this just is kind of came to my mind because of the substitute situation. When you have an uncompensated leave of absence, is that because they ran out of their allotted time? I know sometimes it might be something strange, like, something different, but is that the majority that they've run out of their allotted time?
I would say the majority of the issue is they've, used up their, we'll call it allotted time, whether personal and or sick days to handle issues.
Other personnel questions?
Just under supplemental contracts, can you talk to me about 5 and 6, why there are football coaches for this year?
So that is part of the coaches moving forward with the change of the high school coach, at the football level. So these are the assistants for that program. Why it's listed 17, 18, because these individuals will be Yeah, that's a good question. I have to follow up with Dr. Spiewak, to be quite honest with you. I'm not going to sit there and, give you an answer, but the 17...
but the issue is these individuals start working with our students before their normal season starts. So
that's right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So, as part of spring practices and the like, these individuals will, start, in the 17-18 school year, and that's why it's listed. I forgot about the springtime. The fall was stuck in my head.
Other questions? Other HR questions?
Troy, are these, just curiosity, it would be helpful for me when we see these that are staff or not staff? So if they're part of the for the supplemental contracts, if you could just highlight that along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I could include that detail for you in future motions.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to the next item, curriculum and programs. Dr. Katona.
Thank you. This month, we're asking for the textbook adoption of these textbooks, which were brought to you last month, and I indicated that they would be out for public review. We have the college algebra and trigonometry, the collections for ELA and grade 6, the 2 social studies for 7th and 8th grade, a resource for students taking the AP Capstone, 4 German books for the 4 levels of honors, and the science tech book for grade 5. We have had 2 board members that have dropped by and taken a look at a couple of the books, in particular the algebra, the collections, and the social studies books. If there are any other comments from the public on those books next week, I will certainly let you know.
Any questions for Dr. Katona?
Just to reiterate, it's a lot of these are one-time cost. Just, okay, because I know we talked a little bit about that last month. Okay.
Any other questions? If not, we'll go on to policy. There are no first or second reading policy matters, but there may be as a result of the policy committee meeting that's scheduled for this Thursday. Is that right? Yeah, it's this Thursday. So we may have some for first reading, but obviously there won't be any for your approval next Tuesday. Under other, we have gifts and donations as listed, to accept a monetary gift from the Family Services of Montgomery County, a value of $1,000, accept a gift of office supplies, a gift value of $200. There are no trips, and then a Methacton representative to the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. So it is a need for this board to act and select a Methacton representative to serve on the Board of Directors for the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit beginning July 1, 2018 for a 3-year term. Currently, Mr. Paul Winters, Paul serves in that capacity and is filling the seat that was remaining from the former board member that held that position. So it is going to be needed for us to select and then appoint that individual, an individual. So that's something that the board needs to consider, and who might want to, be in that role and so forth.
I've enjoyed my experience, and I will continue on, but if anybody else is interested in this process, the individual activities that you're voting on, honestly, you don't have a lot of impact on. But the connection points and the legislation updates and the other elements of being part of the IU are very valuable.
Just to jump in, I did briefly speak with Paul about this, that I would express an interest in taking over this position for the rest of the term. So I don't know if anyone else would be interested, but I am. So.
Any other comments on that? If not, we'll go on to substitute rates. So we'll be making some adjustments to these recommendations based on our conversation this evening. And then there's obviously dates for board members' calendars, old business, new business, courtesy of the floor, and then the adjournment.
We are actually missing one date for board members' calendars here, and that would be the policy meeting that was rescheduled for this Thursday. So that would be the 19th.
One other comment. I know that we're going to vote on the substitute and the different elements of those. I'm not sure if it makes sense for breaking those into pieces for the voting meeting. But also, if the guest teacher is something that's pursued through the board, I think the Education Foundation, it might be a connection point around the guest teacher program that we can leverage that knowledge into the community about if we do implement it. So I think it's something that we should consider if it does get approved.
With just a nod of heads, would you like me to separate the three items? Okay, we'll do that. Is there any old business? Is there any new business? And then we get courtesy of the floor.
Sorry, before we move on to courtesy of the floor, I just wanted to acknowledge that yesterday was an advocacy day that PSBA organized, where they encouraged school board directors to go to Harrisburg, meet with legislators, and so on. A number of us were unable to attend, but we're fortunate enough to have Mike Ryan and Liz Drummond attend, so I don't know if either one of them wants to speak, but I wanted to at least recognize their attendance there and extend our appreciation as representing Methacton.
So, yes, yesterday was the PSBA Day of Advocacy for Public Schools. We met with a number of legislators in Pennsylvania. We attended a press conference to show our support for public education. I think it was well received. They said there was the most school board members and people in attendance that they have had ever. And so we met with representative of Senator Rafferty's office. We met with Michael Corr. We met with Matt Bradford. And that was generally what we...
And a couple other representatives who weren't our representatives here, but spread
we
throughout.
Attended the meetings, yeah. So I think it was an effective day. I think, hopefully our voices were heard in support of public education.
Thank you again. Now we'll open it up to courtesy of the floor. Ms. Hollenbach, we can bring the microphone to you. Thank you, Kelly, for taking care of that.
Getting used to this.
Thank you. Candy Hollenbach, Iggville. Now that you mentioned the PSBA, maybe someone on the board can explain. The Commonwealth Foundation submitted a right-to-know request to the Methacton School District to find out how much taxpayers' money was given to the PSBA to lobby against ESAs. Methacton has given the PSBA $125,663 of taxpayer money. This has been going on since 2010. And to refresh your memories, I have been sitting here since 2010, and this has never been discussed with the public. Why is taxpayer money being given to the PSBA to advocate for something that maybe the public isn't on board with? No taxpayer money should be given to anyone without approval by the board and a board vote and input from the taxpayers. I'd like to know when this was done. I mean, this was information that was given, includes district responses to right-to-know request as of 4/10/18. Now, I don't know what your opinion of the Commonwealth Foundation is. They claim they are right-leading, but I have, in my experience of checking them out, every time they have posted something, they can back up what they're posting. They have a list of school districts that came in. Luckily, we're not at the top of the list. But what I want to know is, why is the school district spending taxpayers' money on a lobbying effort? If you want them to lobby for us, then raise the money. This is not a majority of the taxpayers. This has to do with education savings account, and I do know a lot of taxpayers are in favor of this, simply because if they felt the public schools were giving the education they should, they wouldn't need to put their kids in other education. And it really hurts the lower income school districts. But somebody needs to explain why this money was given to them and why it was done with the public not knowing about it. To me, that just borders on fraud. Because if you're spending money and giving it to the PSBA, what else are you giving money to? This is taxpayer money that we are sending you for education. Lobbying should be a whole different ballgame. You should raise your own money for that. So maybe you might want to invite that woman back that was here at the podium and have her explain why they're taking, at this point since 2010, the PSBA has taken $10 million of taxpayers' money across the state of Pennsylvania. That is horrendous. When school districts are complaining they don't have enough money to educate their kids, that $10 million can educate a lot of kids.
Thank you, Ms. Alabak.
And if I may, just to knock it and do it back and forth, but Ken, if you could send me that report, because I would be interested to see if that is money that the district has paid for PSBA services, which we do spend money. We actually just upped our service level for this, which is not for lobbying. It's actually for PSBA services that they provide us. Policy review is especially one of the biggest ones that they provide to us. So if you could send that to me, and I would gladly, follow up with you and look into it. But to the best of my knowledge, we have not designated or separated any money to PSBA for lobbying efforts. But I'd be more than happy to look at that report for you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Mr. Bickelman.
Joe Bickelman, Audubon. I just want to comment on the staffing situation that you have. I just find it appalling that the board doesn't have a report that lists your staff by elementary grade levels, subject areas, psychologists, by elementary, middle school, high school, and have a year-to-year comparison. It was a main part of my budget booklet when I did it for 25 years. I started out with doing enrollment projections. That was the first thing I did at the end of September, did enrollment projections. Statistical analysis, birth rates, and then it got matched up with HR with the staffing report. And that staffing report, I'll send a copy to all the board members if I can get my hand on it. And I can't believe you don't have that. That page would be for the professionals, for the teaching group. There's also a page for administrators, when there used to be food service, custodians, maintenance, security. There should be another page of that too for the non-professionals, so that you have all your people accounted for. Maybe that isn't given to you because then you can't do the division with the number of kids that you have. So you're missing a key number to do the math. I was at Colonial when their enrollment, I guess I wasn't there until 78, but in 73 they had 9,200 kids, and in 83 they had 3,300 kids. So I saw my share of the human element on furlough lists every June. I saw 10, 15, 20 teachers that were furloughed every year. I saw schools closed down, 3, 4, 5 schools, turned into receiving centers, sold to banks, everything like that. So I was in a time when the district consolidated. Now they're up to like maybe 5,000 kids, but there were furlough lists. You talk about the human element. I'm going to tell you about my brother that lives in a ranch home up in the outskirts of Reading that can't pay his taxes. And if he's funding something like this, that's a human element that you have to think about. If that's going on in his district, because the people here in this district here are funding surplus teachers and professional staff. And it's, enrollment went down. So there should be furlough lists that you should work with your lawyer on every June, because that's just the way it works. Enrollment's down. Mr. Andrews has been saying that for years. 1920 at the high school. But, that's $4 or $5 million that the district's taxpayers are funding, that human element. That human element is funding it, and they don't have to fund it, and you'll still maintain your programs. So you really need to look into that and get the reports. Mr. Ryan resigned as chair of the Finance Committee probably because of that reason. And he's not on the committee anymore. And he was a great contributor to that committee like the rest of the people on there. So,
Mr. Bickelman, sorry, can you please wrap up?
Yeah, just one other thing. You might want to check with the new auditing firm where you have to expense your total expense for the early retirement incentive program in this fiscal year and set up a payable on the balance sheet. So you might want to look at that and not budget for it in future years, just tie up the cash. All right, that's all I have. Oh, and the German teacher, it doesn't say new or replacement in the agenda. It doesn't say new position like it always has, or a replacement position like it always has. It's been left out for some reason. So it doesn't say new position, expanding program, or anything like that.
John Andrews, Lower Providence. Again, I see that the timekeeper wants to keep the courtesy of the floor down to 12 minutes. I think that's ridiculous. Adding to Mr. Bickelman's comments about staffing, at the Finance Committee meeting last week, our superintendent indicated that he did an analysis showing 36 excess teachers. That was last July. We've yet to see any cuts in staffing in this budget. I think that's abominable. I guess some people in the room don't read the monthly sheriff's sale ads in the newspapers. As regards furloughing, Dr. Sosnovic indicated that the number of newly certificated teachers in Pennsylvania has gone from 16,000 less than a decade ago to under 5,000 in the most recent year. So, I would think that any teacher furloughed can find multiple jobs and pick among them. So there's no, in my book, there's no human element of someone being dropped off the cliff at that end of things. But 36 excess teachers, that's $5 million more for the taxpayers. They don't just dig into the kitty bank and get $5 million. And I think that I should provide the board members with a study that I did 5 or 6 years ago on the just the high school, where my detailed analysis of the master schedule showed that if there was perfect scheduling, we could have 20 fewer teachers in the high school with no effect on programs. And I understand that this contract, new MEA contract, gives us some additional flexibilities. So I think, the budget has a lot of fiction in it if it has 36 excess teachers or even 18 excess teachers. With regard to some discussions in committee about the Arrowhead School, there are some saying we should tear it down and rebuild it. There are some saying we close it and we go to a K-3 arrangement with more students.
Excuse me, Mr. Andrews, could you please wrap up?
In about a minute.
I understand you don't agree with it, but we do have a policy limiting courtesy of the floor to 3 minutes, and you're beyond that. So please wrap up.
Thank you. I think an alternative is to have K-5, which is a better educational program in the 3 elementaries and in Skyview, and then 6, 7, and 8 in Arcola. And that might involve some new kindergarten bathrooms, but if that were to be implemented in September of 2019, it might take some
Mr. Andrews, please wrap up.
Sorry, but some other important things are cast aside.
Dr. Malik.
Jim Malik, Worcester. And Mr. Andrews talks about $5 million, and Mr. Bickelman talks about saving $4 million. There's $40 million wasted over there at Skyview. It got built without justification. So you want to talk about wasting money? There's a huge waste right there. With regards to Dr. Zerby and his contention that we have 36 too many teachers and declining enrollment, that narrative fits right in with consolidation rather than building a new Arrowhead. So if you want to know how that fits perfectly with consolidation. 36 too many teachers, declining enrollment, don't even think about building a new Arrowhead. At the last meeting, Mr. Ryan stated that our teachers are completely underpaid. I wanted to ask him, where do you come up with that? When we got basically 145 teachers making $90,000+ and $50,000+ in benefits. I wanted to ask him where he comes up with that kind of stuff. Then he says it takes 10 years before you can finally make some money here at Methacton. Where do you come up with these numbers? Where do you come up with these statements? What are you talking about, some kind of money? Then he goes on to state, we just went through over a year for a contract, to be honest with you, on the Finance Committee. From day one, I said we couldn't afford. And you're negotiating the contract? You say we can't afford it? You're going to negotiate it? Well, why don't you tell us why we couldn't afford it and then why you voted for it? I mean, if we can't afford it, what the heck are you doing negotiating for us and voting for it? I understand we can't afford it because the aftermath of this whole thing is you got 12 people you're asking to leave. Early retirement. Yeah, I'm sure we can't afford it. And you're on the negotiating team and you're making these statements. Then you go on to state, we're going to lose good teachers because we can't afford to pay our younger teachers to stay in the district? Why can't we afford to pay them? I mean, you guys are the one holding the purse strings. I did some research and checked. Nobody's leaving here. How many people resigned last year? Less than 1%. And this year, the only people who left were because they either had to move or they retired, or not retired, but quit working. And look at your substitute teachers and how that's working out. You're able to get people to come here for less money because this is a great place to work. So every statement you made is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Dr. Malik, can you please wrap up?
Sure, I'll wrap up. The basic problem with your budget, and the reason you guys have a deficit, as I said before, is you have a bunch of kids, and I used the board as an example. You have 2 or 3 kids apiece at $22,000, and you're not paying any real estate taxes. You're paying $5,000, $6,000, $8,000 in taxes, but your kids are costing $44,000, $66,000, and there's a gap, a $325,000 gap with just you 9 guys. And that gap is 10% of the deficit. So if you want to know what the real problem
Dr. Molly,
is...
please wrap up.
Sure. That's the problem. You know, if you want to do the simple numbers, that's the problem. How do you solve that problem? If you really want to look at it, you got to fix that deficit gap. So take that for what it's worth.
Anyone else for courtesy of the floor? Yes, Ms. Kaplan.
Sharon Kaplan, Lower Providence. Last month I spoke to you guys about the long-term sub situation at the high school, and I just want to make sure that you all are aware that the chemistry long-term sub situation did come to a head, and your high school science teachers have jumped in and taken over to make sure that the kids are receiving the appropriate instruction. And I'm hearing a lot of not so positive talk about our teachers. You need to know that we're going above board, and the high school science department should really be commended for what they've done for those students.
Thank you, Mrs. Kaplan.
Thank you, Ms. Kaplan. I thank you for bringing that up. I was at the high school home and school meeting last week, and it was a topic of conversation with Mr. Sergini, and I have not had a chance to, I'm sure some board members know, but I hadn't had a chance to share that with them, so thank you.
Okay. Is there anything else for courtesy of the floor? Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Okay. Meeting adjourned.